Good afternoon. It's Friday the 17th of January 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today in the studio, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Well, we're going to get straight on with the amusing activities that were going on in Washington yesterday. Of course, the first day of the impeachment trial of Donald Trump. Well, as you can see, formalities, because they had to sign the articles of impeachment. Nancy Pelosi had to sign them, rather, but one pen apparently isn't enough.
It's not. We have a few trays of pens here. What in the world is she doing, Mike? A lot of people are trying to figure this out. Of course, she's taking one pen and signing one letter, each letter, and again, there's a third tray of pens that they'll bring over to her when she runs out. But I couldn't understand why. Why on earth are they doing this ritual, Mike?
Well, apparently it is a tradition under these circumstances. You do this with lots of pens, and then you distribute the pens to your friends as mementos of the occasion. So extremely important that should happen. But there were allegations that these pens had then appeared on eBay. Now I couldn't find any of the actual pens on eBay. I found plenty bogus pens on eBay. You know, a 50-cent plastic pen being sold for $50, this type of thing. But,
Biros.
Yeah, absolutely.
Biros, yeah.
Absolutely. So you know, a profound day. But then it got even worse because they decided that perhaps the best way forward was to be solemn.
Yes. So this is a new thing in American politics, right here. The pomp and circumstance. There's sort of like the Queen dissolving Parliament here. You can see them walking in all solemn, and the commentators on CNN and MSNBC are saying this is a dark day for America, and as you can see, there's Adam Schiff, and she's holding the articles in her hand. This is supposedly a historic moment, although I just have a feeling like they're not going to get the result that they want in this Senate trial, which is about to start in Washington, D.C.
Well, I mean, what is this about, Patrick? This is obviously another fraud, Russiagate-style fraud, but you know, what are the allegations that are being pushed against Trump at the moment?
Well, Russiagate died when the Mueller report was released in the spring, as everybody knows. And with the death of Russiagate, from that grave of Robert Mueller's 3-year-long investigation sprouted the flowers of Ukrainegate on the gravebed of Mueller's Russiagate. So what's Ukrainegate? Apparently, they think Donald Trump was overstepping by exercising his power from the executive branch to call for an investigation into the Bidens, and apparently Joe Biden is meant to be his political opponent in the upcoming election. Therefore, Donald Trump is pre-meddling in the 2020 elections. And so this is apparently a high crime, according to House Democrats. And that's what the basic thrust of the impeachment is.
Oh, okay, but we can't continue this process without bringing the Russians into it somehow. So we had to have the New York Times earlier in the week with this headline: Russians hacked Ukrainian gas company at center of impeachment, and they're saying that the Russians hacked Burisma, which is of course where Hunter Biden was making his millions at the time. Well, who's making this claim? Well, it's a company called Area 1 Security that exists in California. It's run by a guy called Oleg Falkovitz and another guy called Blake Darshay. Now, Falkovitz was an Obama intelligence. He served in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. He was also in the NSA. Darshay, a veteran of CrowdStrike. Now, people familiar with Russiagate and so on should know what CrowdStrike is, right?
CrowdStrike is the private firm that provided the, quote, evidence to the FBI that Russia, the GRU, Russian agents had hacked the Democratic National Committee's servers, leading to the leaks of the Podesta emails and so forth, and then that ended up on WikiLeaks. That's the theory that CrowdStrike provided to the FBI in a report, a redacted report, by the way, and that basically the whole Russiagate conspiracy theory, the official Russiagate conspiracy theory, is predicated really on that claim by private firm CrowdStrike, whose founder, Dmitry Alpovich, a former Russian, I believe is very much connected to the Clinton side of things.
Okay.
So there's no conflict of interest there, of course.
No, of course, and just coming back to the New York Times article for 1 second, because they also said that the GRU hackers that they're alleging hacked Burisma, that this was the group known as Fancy Bear, which is another name that should be known to anybody that's been following this from the beginning.
Which came from this company called CrowdStrike,
Right.
this private firm. So again, the FBI didn't actually look at the servers themselves. They said CrowdStrike was brought in to look at the servers, and the FBI said, that's fine, we'll take your word for it. And they ran with it. So Cozy Bear and Fancy Bear were apparently the Russian hackers, or the secretive hacking group that did this, and that they don't have any actual evidence of the fact that it might have been from the Russian government. So that's all speculative, but that's what passes for empirical evidence these days. So the timing of this New York Times story, Mike, about the Russians rehacking Burisma, the timing of this coming right before the Senate trial. So this is clearly an extension of the kind of deep state political and media meddling that's really been going on for the last 4 years now.
Well, we'll be talking a bit more about disinformation later on in the program, but this seems like a perfect example of it. Yeah. Okay, well, look, let's move on to the JCPOA, which, of course, is the Iran nuclear deal. Now, on Wednesday, we were highlighting on the program the apparent schizophrenia appearing in the Johnson administration. This is a term that's been used in the media. Suddenly, we're getting these US sort of government terms coming to describe British government. But if you remember, what we highlighted on Wednesday was that on Monday, the E3, that's Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, had issued a statement on this, really supporting the JCPOA. Together, we've made clear our regret and concern about the decision by the United States to withdraw from the JCPOA and to reimpose sanctions on Iran. And they said that that all remaining parties, including China and Russia, with the EU as coordinator, have stated their continuing commitment to preserve the JCPOA. By Wednesday, that had apparently changed because Boris Johnson on the BBC Breakfast News had said, well, the JCPOA is basically dead, so let's have a Trump deal. And he said, Trump is the master of the deal, he said. So his position was somewhat different to the E3 statement from only 2 days before. And then within a matter of hours of him saying this on the BBC, the E3 foreign ministers issued their own statement, which said that they share fundamental common security interests, but they have stated unequivocally their regret and concern by the United States to withdraw from the JCPOA. And they said that they were grateful to the Russian Federation and People's Republic of China, with whom we remain in close consultation, for joining us in our common endeavour to preserve the JCPOA. So this seemed strange, and the question I asked at the time, Patrick, was what was going on here? Well, I think you're going to give us a little bit more insight into what is going on exactly. Yeah,
absolutely. So just to recap what you just showed us earlier in the week, Boris Johnson said we're committed to the JCPOA, holding the course. Initially, Europe said we're staying on course with this, and then Boris Johnson switches gears in midstream and says, no, the deal's dead. We need to go with the Trump deal.
Right.
And so where does this leave Europe now? We're here at the end of the week, and another U-turn by the Europeans. Absolutely incredible. Let's have a look at what went down here in just the last 48 hours. So let's just recap the full timeline here. Trump tears up, unilaterally withdraws from the JCPOA, Iran nuclear deal in May of 2018. Okay, that's the first step that started the current situation in crisis. Iran then demands that the EU live up to its treaty obligations, bypass U.S. economic sanctions. So they were supposed to help or reimburse Iran for lost trade, or create a special purpose vehicle to bypass U.S. sanctions by using a non-dollar mechanism, for instance. That didn't happen. So what does Iran do now? At this point, the U.S. is pulled out. Europe is not living up to its obligations. What can Iran do? It suspends its own obligations on restrictions on its nuclear program, enriching uranium and so forth, and citing in the deal Article 26 and 36 of the JCPOA. So Iran is just invoking its rights in this multilateral deal. And what happens next? Well, this is what happened this week.
So that happened on Wednesday. France, Germany, and the UK invoke the DRM, effectively killing. Now, I hadn't appreciated that this effectively kills JCPOA, so why do you say that?
Well, what they've done here is they've invoked a mechanism that's really the last step. When they drew up the JCPOA, all the parties that agreed realized that there is a possibility that some party is going to not live up to its obligations, and therefore there must be a dispute resolution mechanism. But when that happens, then it depends who is going to have the finger pointed at them. In this case, they're pointing the finger at Iran, effectively. So the next thing that's going to happen here, this automatically triggers a UN Security Council motion, and that would put UN sanctions back into place.
So those would be the sanctions that were there pre-2015?
Pre the deal, yeah. So what the Europeans have done here is effectively killed the deal. And this is explained very well in a recent op-ed here by Scott Ritter. This is on RT, actually. And let's look closer at that headline: How Europe Betrayed Iran by Triggering the JCPOA Dispute Mechanism. Here, the EU helps Trump finish the job of killing the Iran nuclear deal. And Scott Ritter goes into detail here, and this is a quote. He's a former UN weapons inspector and probably one of the most qualified people to comment on this particular situation, but also he is absolutely independent, doesn't work for any government agencies in the United States, or doesn't really have skin in the game here. So this is what he says: by invoking the DRM, the Europeans have knowingly and wittingly initiated a process that can only have one outcome: the termination of the JCPOA. In doing so, the EU has breathed life into unfounded U.S. allegations of Iranian nuclear weapons intent, setting up an inevitable clash between Washington and Tehran that has the real potential of dragging the whole world with it. So effectively what Scott's pointing out here, Mike, is that by triggering this last option in the deal, they're really giving credence to the U.S. claims that Iran is secretly running a nuclear weapons program. And there's no evidence to suggest that, including U.S. CIA intelligence assessments have come up negative on that very point time and time again. But this has been repeated by the Trump administration, repeated by Israel. Those two are the main parties repeating this fiction, basically, that Iran's running a secret nuclear weapons program.
I mean, I haven't seen too much from the Russians or the Chinese on this, although the E3 statement implies that they have been in contact with both parties. But, I do understand that the Chinese are still buying oil from Iran, so they're still supporting Iran. They're not imposing their own sanctions. So is there the potential here that actually Iran, China, and Russia end up being a sort of group against the West in this?
Possibly. I mean, I'll tell you, if you look at past behavior from China and Russia, it's very predictable what they're going to do. They're going to sort of stand by the original agreement and keep imploring the U.S. to come back to the table and reinstate the deal. That's their only real viable position, is to abide by international law, and then to sort of stick to the original deal, bring the Europeans back on board. What the U.S. has done here is threaten sanctions against, it looks like, Germany with regards to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and also other secondary sanctions. So I think that pressure is now, they're beginning to fold, the French and the Germans, and the British, of course. Boris Johnson would have folded it earlier, but I think he's trying to put on a good show. But
well, what he wants is a trade deal with the US and a trade deal with the EU. He's got to keep both sides sweet if he possibly can. But the other thing I was going to ask you was if Russia and China can't be brought along with the E3 and the United States, there's not really any prospect of UN sanctions because that any such motion would be vetoed by them in the Security Council, right?
But the sanctions, according to the provisions in this deal, even if one party vetoes, the sanctions are still going to be brought back. So effectively, it brings us back to a pre 2015 situation. The sanctions can be repealed, but there'll need to be some will to do that at the UN Security Council level, mainly from the U.S. and the European partners. But here's the real. This is what the U.S. is really after. Let's take a look at this. Okay, this is Brian Hook. This is the leading U.S. envoy at the moment on this issue, I think, with the Trump administration. And here he's talking to Orient News, and they're run out of the United Arab Emirates. It's a media outlet, very pro-regime change in Syria, backing the moderate rebels. And they want to include the Iranian missile programs in a new deal. This is what it is all about. And why is that important? Look what just happened 2 weeks ago. The Iranian missile intermediate capability basically is threatening to push the U.S. not only out of Iraq, but out of the Middle East, full stop. It's exposed the United States' security posture, its preponderance, its position of preponderance. It's also exposed the allies of the U.S., Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Israel. All of these countries are vulnerable now to an amazingly accurate missile strike that took out 2 U.S. bases. And for the first time in history, the United States has been attacked by a state actor against its military facilities, and it has not responded. That has never happened in history. This is a historic moment. This is why they want to redo the nuclear deal and add missiles into it. Not nuclear missiles, any missiles, because these missiles threaten the United States' ability to lord over the region, basically. So I don't know where this is going to go.
Right. Are we talking about intermediate range missiles then?
We're talking about intermediate range missiles.
So is it a coincidence that the U.S. has pulled out of the intermediate range missile treaty with Russia and also with Iran? Is Trump aiming for an encompassing deal here?
Yeah, he's aiming to redo all of those and to bundle them all three together and to bring Iran into all of those deals as well.
Right.
And to basically restrict their ability to, according to Iran, to defend itself. Okay, the United States is saying these are offensive, but so far they've only used them against ISIS in Syria, locally, and also against the United States. But that was in retaliation under, I believe, Article 51 of the UN Charter. Iran has a right to proportional response to the U.S. attack, a double assassination against General Qasem Soleimani. And also the commander of the PMUs in Iraq, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, which happened on January 3rd. So according to international law, that is absolutely legal response by Iran. They were proportionate, they were accurate, there were no U.S. casualties. So it looks to me, Mike, and I've said this on other programs, that Iran is the rational actor so far, and the United States is the irrational rogue state. And the international community, if you look back at history, as a whole, tends to favor in international relations predictable, rational actors. This is why Russia is slowly making strides internationally, and the U.S. is having more and more problems.
Right.
This is, again, I think this is going to work in Iran's favor in the long run, but in the short run, they have direct threats from the United States and Israel.
Okay, let's move on. Thank you very much for that. So if you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. There are various options to support us there, and your help would be much appreciated. Now, I wanted to highlight this article. Thanks to Alex Thompson for sending it through to me. Britain secretly funded Reuters in the 1960s and 1970s, documents, and this is on the Reuters website itself. And so what they're saying is that in 1969, Reuters agreed to open a reporting service in the Middle East as part of the, it was the Information Research Department. This is a plan to influence international media and really counter what they viewed as communist Soviet propaganda and disinformation. So Reuters wasn't really too happy about having money sent to them directly from the British Foreign Office. So that money was effectively laundered by the BBC. So the Foreign Office fed the money to the BBC, and then the BBC paid Reuters what are described as enhanced subscriptions for access to its news service. And that was, the BBC was given the money back by the Foreign Office. Now, it was the amount of money we're talking about. Remember, this is in the 1960s. Was £350,000 over 4 years. So in the 1960s, that was quite a significant amount of money. Now, what we're talking about here is the Information Research Department. Now, there's quite a bit of information about this, but National Archives certainly has quite a lot of documentation on the International Research Department, the Information Research Department. Now, this was set up in 1948 by Christopher Mayhew, so it was a department of the Foreign Office, the UK Foreign Office. It was eventually closed in 1977 by David Owen, now Lord Owen. And as I say, it was set up, the British government said, to counter Soviet propaganda and infiltration. So it was a Cold War equivalent of the Integrity Initiative, we might say. So let's bring things up to date and look at how the similar programs work these days. We've shown this some time ago, but Mark Sedwell at the top, National Security Advisor, head of the National Security Council, also head of the Cabinet Office, and of course, as head of those two departments, is also head of effectively head of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And we might have said in the 60s and the 70s that was feeding policy through to the Information Research Department. Of course, nowadays we have the Counter Disinformation and Media Development Programme run by Andy Price in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and of course they are funding things like the Integrity Initiative. Now, unfortunately for them, the Integrity Initiative was exposed, but what we have there absolutely is Foreign Office money being fed into an organisation which is providing narratives to the mainstream media. That, of course, has been more or less replaced now with the Open Information Partnership. And if you're not aware of that, you can have a look at their website, which is openinformationpartnership.org. They call themselves a diverse network of established organisations and individuals across Europe working in open, independent, fact-based reporting. Yeah.
So open and independent, but yet funded by the NATO member states.
Absolutely.
Nice.
So here we are. Here are the partners: Bellingcat, the Atlantic Council, that's DFR Labs, I suppose, Media Diversity Institute, Zinc Network, supported and funded by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So that makes them independent, Patrick.
And I might add, the Atlantic Council has been hired by Facebook to advise them on who to deplatform, which accounts to shut down, who to shadow ban, who to censor, basically. That's the Atlantic Council there.
Right. Now, just to go back to the Information Research Department for 1 second, Pat. In 1948, just after it was set up, they were extremely concerned that the Communist Party was going to win the Italian general election, and so they started a program of counter disinformation in Italy to make sure that that didn't happen. And this, this amuses me greatly in this modern day of the narrative that the Russians are interfering in foreign elections, because this goes right back to the very beginnings of this type of counter-disinformation program by the British government. And it was the British government that was interfering in the elections of a foreign nation in order to make sure that the group that they thought were the most appropriate won that and became the government of the day in that country. So the hypocrisy is staggering.
I think you find that in any left-wing or left-leaning government during the Cold War period was targeted by the United States, Central Intelligence Agency, and all these very similar operations, and by the the Information Research Department. I get them confused. The Information Research Department is performing that same function, basically, for the UK in and around Europe mainly.
And of course, if we want to look at more recent elections and interference in those, we can't exclude the Integrity Initiative's interference in the UK politics with respect to Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, that's a good example, and that's a clear, bona fide example of Integrity Initiative that Cold War-esque program that's being run now, meddling in UK elections.
Yes.
So doing exactly what the Information Research Department did during the Cold War.
Yes.
Exactly the same thing.
Now, if you'd like a little bit more background information on the Open Information Partnership, go over to the In This Together blog, and Ian Davis has published a series of articles, 6 articles on the Exposed Network and the Open Information Partnership. It's a very good summary of what that is all about. It's quite extensive, and so recommend people go and read that. So, Patrick, sticking with more or less the same subject now, Silicon Valley and information warfare.
Well, let's just continue on what did we talk about before, Mike. This extends well into the kind of social media sphere, mainly through these U.S. corporations that effectively have a monopoly on social media globally, not just in the U.S., globally. Yes. But just on the U.S. side here, Facebook removing posts that are supportive of Soleimani. This is the Iranian general that was assassinated by Donald Trump on January 3rd. They're actually doing that. And we'll tell you why in a minute. Twitter's also suspended recently official Venezuelan accounts, financial and oil ministry accounts, Bolivarian National Armed Force accounts on Twitter. These are informational accounts that you use to keep the public up to date on various announcements, public broadcasting accounts, and accounts of elected officials and politicians, Mike. So this is what Twitter has been doing the last few weeks, and Twitter also suspended the account of the Syrian president, the Syrian presidency, after an interview with him was published from an Italian media outlet, and their account published clips of this, and Twitter suspended their accounts. They also suspended the Russian embassy in Damascus, Mike, because they posted some information that was critical of the white helmets. Okay, so Wikipedia has been caught recently. Obviously, they've been doing this for years, but really attacking any OPCW or Duma dissenting voices. Jonathan Steele, the journalist, has been attacked and edited. His work has been edited out of Wikipedia by Philip Cross, the Philip Cross editing cell. And this is in the full knowledge. Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, has absolute knowledge that all of this is going on because he's admitted it on social media, and he's derided people in the alternative media as conspiracy theorists and quacks and everything. This was his defense of why Wikipedia isn't doing anything about this vexatious editing that clearly looks like it's being done by a group of people, but under the name Philip Cross. But you can obviously read quite a bit about that right now online. So what's our conclusion here, Mike? Well, the conclusion is that Twitter, Facebook, Google, et al. Are extensions of the Pentagon and the Central Intelligence Agency. They're actually functioning, doing information warfare, forward operations on information warfare. And so these Silicon Valley companies are actively doing this right now. And I want to thank Eva Bartlett, who serialized quite a bit of this in her recent article, which is up on RT Op-Edge. There's a lot of good material up there at the moment. So we were looking at it this week. But so let's look at what a couple of recent announcements just in the last week, Mike. Instagram admits it's removing posts supportive of Iranian General Soleimani to comply with U.S. sanctions. Think about that for a minute. This is a new development in this. And then also, Press TV UK has been pulled down from YouTube. Again, they're saying that somehow this has to do with the compliance of U.S. sanctions. So because Iran is under U.S. sanctions, then if you're a media outlet reporting on Iran, you could be, or you're an Iranian media outlet like Press TV, you could be, fall under U.S. sanctions regimes, and therefore you can't have any access to anything that's hosted on a U.S. platform. This is new. This is taking things a little bit further. So sanctions are run by the Treasury Department through OFAC, through their Office on Sanctions. So effectively, the U.S. Treasury Department is now in charge of administrating free speech. This is where we're at. This is a U.S. federal government who is now exerting censorship worldwide by imposing sanctions on social media platforms.
But there is no legal basis for this, so there's no requirement by the platforms to comply with these requests from the US government or the UK government or the EU government. Therefore, the platforms are clearly fully in line with the wishes of the government.
Well, in the domestic U.S., it's voluntary, Mike. But for geofencing globally, the U.S. is trying to argue that they are hosted in other countries and have foreign subsidiaries. Therefore, they would fall under any sanctions regime that the U.S. chose to selectively impose, for instance.
Right.
So this is totally arbitrary. It's totally subjective. There's no standard, or there's no. They're literally making up as they go along. Right now. So this is disturbing. What is this? Well, this is what Benito Mussolini, in this famous quote, "Fascism should be more appropriately called corporatism because it is a merger of state and corporate power." This is the former fascist dictator in Italy, Benito Mussolini, and we could just as easily superimpose that man over there because he is absolutely responsible in merging corporate and government interests and power. We have just shown you an example of this, multiple examples of this. In fact, this is being done by United States Silicon Valley firms. There is no doubt about it. This is fascism. It's a special type of fascism, Mike, at the moment. I call it latte fascism. But nonetheless, that's exactly what it is. Benito would know. Benito, he was a pioneer in this sort of thing, so he would know.
Okay, well, let's continue this theme and come to the UK. And here is Jeremy Darroch, who's the chief executive of Sky. And he was saying today, I want your support, rather, he's saying this to MPs, in establishing an independent regulator who will finally tackle online harms. The prolific spread of misinformation, online abuse and fake news has shown the damage that unregulated online platforms are doing to our society. Now, I would argue that if he's saying that they are doing damage to our society, I think his main concern isn't about damage to our society, it's about damage to his media platform and other mainstream media platforms who are suffering commercially as a result of the success of social media and the fact that individuals are not willing to just swallow the messages that are being given by mainstream media, but are doing their own research and posting their own information and sharing their own information on social media. Of course, he is talking about online harms. We discussed this at length last year because the government had pushed forwards its white paper on online harms, and the key aspect of that wasn't their concern for child abuse online and other problems online. Their main concern was about disinformation, as he is reflecting in this statement that he made earlier. So in the Queen's speech, Boris Johnson, of course, saying that he was going to be pushing forward with the legislation that's going to come out of that online harms white paper. But today he said that the public response to the online harms public consultation is still being analysed, so they aren't ready to publish a bill just yet. This is causing a bit of frustration to people in Parliament, and so
why do you think it's still being analysed, Mike?
Because there was quite a good response to that online harms public consultation,
pushback.
And I think there was quite a lot of pushback on it. Yes, absolutely.
And so they're analysing the pushback right now.
Yes.
Trying to calculate or calibrate how they're going to respond to what is clearly an overwhelmingly disapproval from the public on this
right.
issue.
They have somewhere they want to go with this. They have a destination in mind. We're not absolutely clear what that is, although there's plenty of scope within the online harms white paper for that to be a very bad place for freedom of speech and so on.
The Murdochs, the Skies, they absolutely support this type of government censorship because they're trying to claw back power. They're trying to claw
their market share is really what they're concerned about. Their commercial ability. I mean, they see social media as an existential threat.
Not only social media, blogs,
yes,
independent news websites like ours. They see this as a threat. They want to eliminate the competition en masse by using the government as a hammer.
Absolutely, and this comes back to your fascism point again, because this is the corporate media finds themselves in sync with government wishes for different reasons, admittedly, but they find themselves in sync with it. Anyway, so Boris is saying they're still looking into the public consultation, still analysing that. So Tom McNally here from the House of Lords. Lord McNally is a bit impatient about this, so he's introduced a private members bill. We'll keep an eye on it and see how it goes. But basically saying I have prepared the Online Harms Reduction Regulator Report Bill to keep up momentum. Momentum I fear may be lost, and to provide a platform for wider public debate. But what he's suggesting mainly is that Ofcom becomes an interim regulator of the internet and of social media, and he's hoping to kickstart this and move this whole business forward. Very much a big body of momentum starting to build to bring this regulation / censorship regime in.
The other thing that we didn't mention, which a lot of people know, Mike, is that government and corporate interests in terms of big media, they do come together very nicely when it comes to managing the narrative of any major event, particularly military interventions, or as we saw with the supposed chemical weapons attack in Duma in April of 2018, which they attributed blame to the Syrian government and used that to justify a military intervention. Anything surrounding those issues, the government and the mainstream media work very closely together, not just in the way that we showed you earlier with these various foreign office quangos and disinformation police and so forth, but they actually work directly. The government feeds propaganda, they feed talking points directly into mainstream media, they feed disinformation into mainstream media through all of these different channels, and I don't see any conversation by the government about their role in injecting disinformation into the press, into the mainstream press, into the public sphere, or mainstream media's role. Looking at papers like The Guardian have absolutely been egregious, literally inventing fake stories about Russia and Assange and WikiLeaks, and putting that out as news on a daily basis. Not just The Guardian, they're all at it, basically. They're not included in this conversation, and yet what they put out has the maximum impact by orders of magnitude compared to the disparate collection of blogs and a few odd articles that might appear on Facebook, that most of which are a joke that people pass around because they're having a chuckle. Okay, I don't see any of the real sources of disinformation from mainstream outlets, from government itself. This is not included in this conversation.
No, it isn't.
So I don't think this has any legitimacy in reality, and I think that's probably reflected in a lot of the feedback when they opened up for public comments on the Online Harms initiative.
Yes. Okay, let's end with defence then, well, we'll be glad to know that Annegret was in the UK yesterday meeting Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary. This, of course, is Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, who is the German Defence Minister, so she was meeting at Horse Guards. They were discussing what they described as global challenges facing both countries, including tensions in the Gulf. In the press release that they released, of course, they were talking NATO, because of the importance of NATO to European defence. But then she went to the London School of Economics and was speaking there, and she was talking about Britain being given privileged third-party status. I'm convinced that the UK has to be a privileged third party in our German and EU cooperation as a third party. So she's talking about bringing the UK into defence union. Now the Ministry of Defence press release was focusing on bilateral agreements and focusing on NATO. So let's just remember, of course, that on the EU's own diagram of what defence union is, bilateral agreements on the left-hand pillar and NATO on the right-hand pillar are two of the key pillars of defence union. So that's that. Now, if you want to know a bit more about Annegret's policies, there's a fantastic article from David Ellis on the policies of the new German Minister of Defence. Do go and read that. And just to highlight one particular quote from that article, this is what she said: "In my view, conscription ought to apply to men and women, and even people who are not German citizens but who have been granted residence status. So she's very keen to see a massive expansion of German military and EU military, and conscription may be required in order to achieve that. So that was a very interesting meeting yesterday. Ben Wallace was very excited about it, but of course he wasn't highlighting any discussions that they had on EU defence union as an institution, but being very vague about what they were talking about.
So that's a new defence minister. They seem to change every few months.
Well, no, of course, because Annegret took the job over from Ursula von der Leyen, who left as German defence minister to become the president of the European Commission. And of course, as president of the European Commission, she is driving forward the defence union development. And I'm just going to end by highlighting this article in the Express from Frederick Forsyth. Today is a secret EU army marching up on us, says Frederick Forsyth. He is again highlighting in a very succinct and very clear way what's going on here, and talking about Ursula von der Leyen's recent visit to the UK and the implications of that. So I suggest that people read that just to finish this item off.
Freddie Forsyth, the great espionage novelist.
Absolutely.
Good to see that he's taken an interest in this issue.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, well, we will leave it there for today. Thank you very much for joining me today, Patrick. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back, of course, at the same time, 1 p.m. as usual on Monday. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.